In my previous video, I talked about the various cut colossi from Shadow of the Colossus. I referenced some of the more recent leaks, however I only became aware of them as I was editing that video. Among the leaks was a storyboard dated July 2004, back when the game had 24 colossi. It details the history of the Forbidden Lands and offers an explanation of how Dormin came to be. In this video, I'm going to read through the storyboard and afterwards talk about some of its inspirations. Before we begin, we must establish how time works in this land. Eras of the world is a substitute for the common era dating system. This was Ueda's way of denoting years in the Wonder universe, and it appears to be mostly equivalent to real-life years. BWE means before world era, and WE means world era. It's the same as BC and AD. A large-scale disaster took place around this period, sweeping away most of the known world. The specifics of what transpired are unknown, but it is written that this was a natural disaster. It wiped out most of mankind and reshaped the local topography, significantly altering the people's perspective on their land. The population bottleneck reduced the spread of man upon the region from several million to nothing more than a few scattered pockets of nomadic survivors who banded together. Over the years, the survivors, now consisting of dozens of thousands of people, began to scatter abroad. They split in half, with one half heading towards the northwest and the other towards the southeast. The remaining half of the nomadic civilization journeyed southeastward. They came upon a plain in the land of Sinar, at the ends of the earth. They settled there, making it their home. Back then, the earth contained giants. Powerful men and women, of renown among the nomads, encountered these beings in their explorations of Sinar, and were awestruck by the giants and their kind, who came to be known as the Colossi. They were biologically immortal and varied in appearance to reflect their environment. It was said that these majestic beings were deities that embodied nature, and it came to pass that the mighty men and women were outraged by the Colossi, for they considered them to be responsible for the great catastrophe that had wiped out the known world. They rebelled and waged war against their kind, and called themselves Dormin, meaning insurgent, for they were the mighty hunters in the face of gods. The Dormin gathered their people and forged weapons. They formed an army and slayed one of the Colossi. Its blood spilled, marking the land, and its corpse became a hillock of young sprouts of grass. They found that with every Colossus whose blood they spilled, it gravitated towards the first, and so on, and the hill grew. The nomads said, "Come, and let us build a great monument from the corpses of the gods at the center of the land, and make a name for ourselves, reaching the heavens, and we shall never again be led astray by the gods' catastrophes." The tower had become strong and tall at their hands, so they called it the Sky Tower. They built miniature shrines in the tower's image across the land in places where the giants had fallen, as a way of mocking them. The campaign against the Colossi was drawing to an end, and it had passed that after each kill, the Dormin had deteriorated and become stripped of humanity. One day, it was not one of the gods' fallen corpses which gravitated towards the Sky Tower, but rather the Dormin insurgents themselves. They coalesced and and merged into one another, forming a collective entity whose likeness was that of the Colossi they slaughtered. And so they came to believe that they had ascended into godhood by overthrowing the gods and taking their place. They thought that they could rule the land fairly, ensuring that the people were never again scattered by any catastrophes they judged to have come from the old gods. The people who had abstained from the slaughter's numbers now ranked in millions. They were awestruck by the turn of events, and thus the Great Divide took place. Several clans believed the Dormin had ascended into godhood through their deeds. The others deemed the entity and their likeness as cursed and possessed by the dead spirits of the innocent creatures they had slaughtered, and these people were known as the clans of the ancients. Each clan considered the other to be at odds with their own beliefs, and it came to happen in the days of the brave elders that the clans of the ancients divided. The clans of the ancients separated from the Dormin followers. Both clans departed from the presence of the Sky Tower, building kingdoms and cities across the land, each after their own view. And it came to pass, 400 years later, that the descendants of the Dormin followers infringed upon the peaceful arrangements of their ancestors. They declared war on the clans of the ancients, who had rejected the Dormin. Their conflict was bloody, with the death toll in the thousands. Finally, elders from the clans of the ancients gained the upper hand and defeated the Dormin worshippers. The elders used runes and magic that their ancestors had drawn from the Colossi in order to cast away the Dormin. Up until this point, the Dormin had remained neutral and watched the conflict from afar, refusing to intervene in the matters of those who they now considered to be merely mortals. Infuriated by the elders' actions, the Dormin manifested and attempted to stop them. However, the ancients gathered and used the way of the giants to draw the Dormin's essence away from its vessel, rendering it powerless in the process. And so it came to happen that the power of the slain Colossi was split between 24 great idols. The power was drawn to statues erected by peoples across the land. It also went to the remaining Colossi, who had hid from the Dormin's wrath before its birth centuries ago. The Colossi were corrupted with the Dormin's matter. With the power of the giants who ruled this land sealed away in these towering vessels and statues, it came to pass that the people deemed the land cursed by its bloody history of conflict and disrespect of the natural order. And so they sealed it away forever, building a great bridge to evacuate the people from these lands forever. Now we know the backstory, here are some of my thoughts on what could have inspired it. The Sky Tower seems to be based on the mythological Tower of Babel. The story of its construction, given in the book of Genesis, is an attempt to explain the existence of diverse human languages. The Babylonians wanted to make a name for themselves by building a mighty city and a tower with its top in the heavens. God disrupted the work by so confusing the language of the workers that they could no longer understand one another. The city was never completed, and the people were dispersed over the face of the earth. This is very similar to the events detailed in the storyboard. When reading the storyboard, I pronounced the name of the land as Sinar. On reflection, I should have probably pronounced it Sinar, similar to Shinar from the Hebrew Bible, which is a clear inspiration. Shinar was used to describe the land, which includes the cities of Babel, Erech, and Akkad, within the kingdom of Nimrod. Nimrod himself seems to have been a source of inspiration for this story. He is a legendary biblical figure of the book of Genesis. described in Genesis as the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Extra-biblical traditions identified Nimrod as the ruler who commissioned the construction of the Tower of Babel, which led to his reputation as a king who was rebellious against the gods. There is some consensus among biblical scholars that the mention of Nimrod in Genesis is a reference not to an individual, but to an ancient people in Mesopotamia. All of this is sounding very familiar and a clear influence on the storyboard. If you've made it this far, I'd ask that you'd consider subscribing. I've exceeded the public watch hours required to become a YouTube partner, but I'm still short on subscribers, so every subscriber helps. Thank you for watching.